Ugh, just got back from diving into the wreck. Just a minute. Ugh, take off the absurd flippers. Well, I also just finished reading all of your comments on Adrienne Rich's Diving into the Wreck. And as many of you so correctly noted, this is not a poem just about scuba diving, but about something much bigger, deeper, darker, and more abstract. We know that because she mentions Book of Myths at the very beginning, and then she mentions it again at the end. And at the end, she says that our names are not in the Book of Myths. So there's other clues too, but those are two pretty big ones that she's not talking about a straightforward scuba trip, right? So when she says that our names do not appear in the Book of Myths, she's letting us know that she's escaped, that somehow she's no longer part of that wreckage. Overall, this is a poem about revisiting the scene of a crime. We might say it's the heroic classic hero's journey, I should say, hero's journey. The heroic transition from one state to another, or a revisiting of a troubled, dark, or hidden past. So we can say heroic because right at the very beginning we see a couple of things. First of all, the narrator has to suit up, right? She puts on the body armor, the absurd flippers, the grave and awkward mask. She has her knife, the camera, the Book of Myths, and then she descends. She has to make that transition to the place by herself. So Rich was making use of some of the common tropes from epic stories about heroes. So many of you also very astutely paid attention to repeated elements. Obviously, the knife and the camera were repeated more than once, the Book of Myths. We get some of the other repeated elements were the idea of words, stories, myth, book, and she mentioned map once. And yet, what's so interesting is I think she's drawing our attention to these elements because she's not looking for the myth, but she's looking for the thing itself. So that's part of the journey. She's escaped the myth. Her name is not in that book. She's gone down to the wreckage to actually face it, to face the reality, to face the truth, the remains of what had been some kind of powerful force. It's now reduced to a wreckage, and its cargo and victims are at the bottom of the ocean. So she's no longer interested in what she's been taught. Myths, of course, that term has powerful connotation for us. Myths are things that are commonly at one point and commonly believed, but are now understood to be untrue. So we have this tension between what had been taught and the reality, and she's there to face the reality. So what is the wreckage? That's the question, right? Rich was a feminist writer. She passed away in 2012, and she wrote that particular poem. It was part of a collection of poems that came out in the early 70s during the Vietnam War and, of course, the height of the women's movement. And it's easy to see how she might be discussing the wreckage of patriarchal tradition, right? But I think the beauty of this poem, and really the power of poetry, of a well-written poem, is that it's open to multiple readings. We can all find something to identify in it because of the common human experience to which it refers. It's a common human experience to experience tragedy, to revisit tragedy and to learn from it, to grow, to be changed by it, to leave things behind. There's a sense of loss and transition in this poem, right? And that's something we can all identify with. And that's what good poetry does. It speaks to us on a personal level, as well as addressing what we might call a common human experience. And I think that's what we saw here in this poem. Well, I look forward to reading more of your insights, as well as the poetry that you're going to be writing, beginning with the module in this week. I got to turn this off.